When Blackpink debuted, they were referred to as the pretty version of 21. Their seniors who preceded them, whose looks had been publicly and bluntly degraded by their own CEO. During that time, South Korea had fallen in love with two women in the second generation for their visuals, Suzy from then JYP's group Miss A and Yoona from SNSD. Both girls had taken the public by storm, not only by being part of well-received and loved K-pop groups in the country, but by overtaking the acting industry. Suzy was titled the nation's first love, while Yoona pretty much literally set the standard for beauty amongst K-pop idols. I need you to understand how big these women were and still are. Their influence was massive. Both had capitalized on their looks, popularity, and skills to propel them further into stardom. With the third generation having introduced themselves, fans were eyeing to see who would become the next woman South Korea would fall in love with. At that time, this is around 2015, the nation had Irene from Red Velvet, whose visuals pretty much stunned the public and would later on become the most requested idol face to imitate during surgery. Twice as Chewy's devastating good looks had fans in a daze, but her nationality posed to be a problem in becoming Korea's so-called it girl. But many eyes were on YG, as they were the only big three company that was yet to produce a third-generation girl group of their own. But interestingly enough, they had already showed us the faces of these members in order to build anticipation. Plenty of people during that anticipation predicted that Jisoo, that group's visual, would become the nation's next love. Her looks being amongst the few like Yoona who fit the Korean beauty standards perfectly, so I think it's safe to say that her position was pretty much a slam dunk, right? Well, time would prove no. Because not too long into their debut, South Korea proved to be more obsessed with another member in the group. Over the years, Blackpink has had the most hateful solo stands in all of K-pop, but what really set Jisoo stands apart is the fact that they behaved like a scorned wife. Their roots of hatred and anger went deeper than just some shallow pettiness that turned into an all-out war. It partly plays into the sneakiness that comes with it. Like all the Blackpink solo stands, the hatred of Jennie was an important part of their toxicity, but theirs had an extra layer of it. Lisa's solo stand's toxicity was built on fake sympathy. Jennie's was built over fear. Rose's came from an obsession with being different. But Jisoo's was built from bitterness. And the beginning would prove to be Jennie taking over what they believed was a crown that rightfully belonged to Jisoo, the title of the it girl of South Korea. While discussing Jia's solo career with my best friends, we talked about the similarities of the types of idols South Korea often gravitate towards. We came to the conclusion that because of this, almost anyone could predict who from a K-pop group would succeed if they pursued a solo music career. The longer one is a K-pop stan, the easier it is to tell what makes an idol stand out to the South Korean public. It's almost linear. They come from a popular group, they must have outstanding visuals in their generation, they must have a clean reputation, and for extra merit, must be pushed by their company. All things that Jisoo had, except for that last one. The push from YG was mainly from Jennie. It seems like it was part of YG's plan from the beginning to have her to be the face and the love of South Korea, not their visual bombshell Jisoo. And like anything else the big three sells to the Korean public, they were willing to buy it. The reason must have happened because there was this need to take over the Western market. One thing HYBE and YG shared in those years in terms of goals was the need to make their groups go global. HYBE concentrated on using the concept of self-love, which was huge in the West at that time. And YG, having already created a boy group that the West was calling the kings of K-pop, simply wanted that phenomenon transferred to a girl group. And if that was to be achieved, they had to think bigger than Jisoo as being their face. The answer was Jennie, a group with a girl crush concept whose face had the persona of an unbeatable boss bitch to an audience that was craving girl power around the world. It was a smoking gun that they needed. But Jennie, despite being beautiful, did not suit Korea's beauty standards nearly as well as Jisoo did. To a show business layman like you and me, the answer would be simple. Push Jennie internationally and Jisoo domestically. But YG had other plans. The plans? To make Jennie attractive to the Korean public. Make them fall in love with a girl who to some degree defies their beauty standards. This strategy involved pushing Jennie front and center in their music, brand deal promotions, and outfits. She had to stand out at the expense of the group, and they had to make sure that South Korea's eyes were on her. And by the time fans found out what YG was up to, it was a little too late. South Korea was already head over heels with Jennie, and every brand was scrambling to have Jennie represent them by using or wearing their products. Suddenly, a spot that fans thought was reserved for Jisoo was gone. Just like that. Every member of Blackpink was known for that one factor that set them apart and made their presence essential to the group. Essentiality of members was being discussed a lot through K-pop because of its presence in the West. K-pop haters in the West had often brushed off K-pop idols as untalented individuals, so unlike past generations, no one wanted to be caught dead standing a filler member that the group could have just easily done without. And for a group as popular with few members as Blackpink, picking them apart was easy. Jennie had her rap skills, Rosé had her voice, and Lisa had her dance skills. The one thing that set Jisoo apart, her visuals, was no longer relevant when speaking on the necessity to Blackpink, because Jennie was doing her job without the perfect visuals. Apart from her visuals, Jisoo was a good singer, but Rosé had what was considered very distinct and unique vocals. It was her thing, so clearly Jisoo needed something else that the other girls could not compete with. This is where the evil genius of Jisoo's toxic stance comes in, because when the Jennie hate train took off in early 2018, Lisa and Rosé stans were straight up haters of Jennie, but Jisoo stans could throw stones and hide their hands. This is why my thumbnail refers to them as a brood of vipers. Vipers are poisonous and dangerous, but they're slick and deceptive. Jisoo stans were the biggest Jennie haters and actually propelled her hate train, not Lisa stans. The difference is that Lisa stans, were louder and more overt in their hate. Therefore, when we revisit the hate train, they seem to catch all the smoke for starting it, when the real founders of this mess get away with it. Jisoo stans are made up of two factions, Blackpink stans and non-Blackpink stans. During Jennie's hate train, she was the member with an overwhelming number of outsider fandoms as stans. As I mentioned in episode 2, a lot of non-Blackpink fans were highly involved in Jennie's hate train based on their personal vendettas against Blackpink as a whole. The issue was that OT fans were becoming increasingly aware of these outsiders that were using any excuse to hate Jennie, meaning to avoid being called out or straight up being harassed by blinks, they needed a plan that would give them an in. This is where the slyness of it all comes in. The plan they devised was to pose as Blackpink's solo stans. That way suspicion would die down around accounts complaining about mistreatment and favoritism in the group. All that was left was to pick which member they would pose as fans of. They could go with Lisa, whose fans had the strongest argument against Jennie being pushed. Or they could choose Rosé, who had a lot of backing to the point where fans believed, apparently, allegedly. Take notes of these words we should all know how to use right now per courtesy of our Princess Changwon-yang. But apparently even her own dad was upset about her so-called mistreatment. But Jisoo had more than just talent and image. She had the power of the apocalypse. Oh, you know what apocalypse I'm talking about. The MR removed videos. MR removed videos are those in which music recording, which is where the MR comes from, is artificially removed, apparently leaving live vocals of a stage performance. It cannot be proven how accurate these MR removed videos are, but K-pop fans have used them for years as evidence of vocal talent or lack thereof. These became highly popular in 2018, and amongst the most watched groups was, you guessed it, Blackpink. A high number of these videos showcase the other members basically struggling with vocal stability while Jisoo was breathing through with little to no difficulty. Now, I don't want this to take away from Jisoo's stability, okay? It is important to know that it's common knowledge by now that Jisoo has one of the most stable vocals in K-pop. You can barely catch her running out of breath or being shaky. Keep that in mind. But what we need to take into account was the exaggeration of the other members' struggles. It is believed to a sizable degree that these videos were being edited to make the other girls sound far worse than they actually were. These videos had become insanely popular because several fans and haters were spreading them all over social media. Blackpink's success as a whole had made the public salty, so the videos were the perfect opportunity to cast doubt on how much success Blackpink deserved. Red Velvet and Twice had some of the biggest anti-Blackpink stans who used this apocalypse as their base argument as to why their respective groups should have been the international sensations instead of Blackpink. Comments flooded these videos, basically making fun of how the girls were struggling and Jisoo was pretty much working overtime with no pay to quote-unquote save the group. For the hater who wanted to infiltrate the fandom, this was the perfect member to back up. For Jisoo stans, this was the smoking gun to the argument I mentioned earlier about essentiality. Jisoo was now necessary to the group, because if she wasn't, who the hell was gonna sing live? With both real and fake Jisoo stans having the agenda to hate on the other members, add in the MR removed videos being spread on various platforms for haters to access during the summer when most K-pop fans had nothing but time to waste, and all this at the time of their most commercially successful comeback, you cannot fathom the disaster that was 2018. Now you see why I call it an apocalypse. This shit was nuclear. Fans went from Jisoo being the only stable member of the group to straight up claiming that she was the only one with talent. They swore up and down that she was the only one who bothered to improve, to take her skills seriously, and despite being a visual, wasn't arrogant to depend on her looks to take her places. She wanted her skills to do all the talking, while the other members simply didn't care. Yet in light of all this, YG didn't push her to the forefront because of their obsession with Jennie. You can see where this is going, right? If stage 1 was infiltrating the fandom and stage 2 was propelling Jisoo on a pedestal to bring the other girls down, Jennie especially, then stage 3 was gathering sympathy for her from the rest of the stan universe. Despite this behavior being executed by haters masking themselves as Jisoo fans, her real fans bought into it because in the end the goal was the same, to knock off Jennie's crown. It is important to note that haters masquerading as Jisoo stans were only interested in the first 2 stages. The third one was mainly implemented by her fans. The haters did not really care for Jisoo at all, she was but a pawn in a bigger game. Now back to implementing stage 3. If Lisa's sympathy was based off of the racism she was facing in South Korea, and Jennie's was off the insane bullying that she dealt with, then Jisoo's was founded on her not being given the recognition she deserved. This was applied to every member, but Jisoo was far ahead. Since she had been paraded as the only member who could sing, and many outside the fandom had been fooled into thinking that the rest of the group had no talent, her fans' plan of action was now to convince everybody that she was being given less than she was qualified to handle in comparison to everyone else. Exhibit A, the line distribution. Jisoo stans made up some bogus nonsense about Blackpink's line distribution being so unfair and uneven. This is laughable to anyone with common sense now, as we have proof that that could not be further from the truth. But at that time, the stage at which the events played out was completely different. We're talking about people who were thoroughly convinced that Jisoo was the best singer in the group, yet she was always last in line distribution. From these lenses, it does feel unfair, yes. But Rose was actually the group's main vocalist, and Jennie was both lead vocalist and main rapper, and because she had more shoes to fill, she would receive more lines. Last place often alternated between Lisa and Jisoo, as they both only had one position vocally. Secondly, Jisoo being last doesn't mean that she had little lines. The largest gap they ever had in their line distribution was in Forever Young, in which she and Rose was separated by 16%, which undoubtedly is a lot. But this was very rare, and I don't think it ever happened again. When Jisoo was last, most of the gaps never exceeded 10%. In fact, Blackpink as a group easily had some of the fairest line distribution in K-pop overall. But when people are blinded by hate and rage, it is almost difficult to see the truth. Jisoo stans had an agenda to push, and nothing was getting in their way, including common sense. Exhibit B, the Popularity Olympics. With Blackpink being marketed in the West, it was obvious who the public favorites were. A huge number of fans were focused on either Lisa or Jennie, and after these two, Rose was easily the most stanned, making Jisoo technically the least popular in the group. Not in K-pop, just in the group. Most K-pop idols right now cannot even dream being on Jisoo's level of popularity, but her fans did not care because this was supposed to be a competition between the big four. Being the least popular, coupled with the line distribution allegations, her fans used this as proof to push the notion that Jisoo was severely underappreciated and underrated in the industry. Here's a not so popular opinion. Most members of a group who are least stanned are not paid attention to for a reason. Yes, it doesn't apply to everyone, of course, there are exceptions to every rule. Sometimes the company simply doesn't push that particular member forward, but others are not paid attention to simply because they do not stand out, at least in comparison to other members. I keep trying to tell Gail stans this, but they never want to listen. Jisoo wasn't being hidden in the dark, making it difficult to see her. No, she was 1/4 of the most popular girl group in the freaking world. If she was not being stanned, YG wasn't to blame. But at that time, K-pop stans were never accepting a reason outside of blaming a company for everything. The conclusion was that her underappreciation was due to Jennie's favoritism, and YG only caring about the untalented members of her group. And that was the only answer they were willing to accept. The underdog storyline was an easy one to hop on because it attracted non-blinks to stan Jisoo, and it made Jisoo supporters feel like heroes of some sort. Everyone in Blackpink was pasted as an obstacle to Jisoo's stardom, and for that reason, the other members paid the price. Jisoo's real and fake fans made it their mandate to bash and harass every member of Blackpink as much as possible. But again, it was not in the overt way that other solo stans were implementing. In the first episode, I mentioned that Lisa and Jennie were bound to be compared because of the similarity in their personas and responsibilities, which led to their fandoms ripping into each other more often. This was no different from Jisoo and Rose stans. Apart from the war on vocals, Rose and Jisoo stans tried to one-up each other as to who was the most mistreated. Both fandoms felt as if the girls were taking a backseat to Jennie and Lisa's popularity, which led them to squabble amongst themselves on who was the most mistreated and who needed better attention. Comment sections of Blackpink were filled with complaints about Jisoo's mistreatment, outsiders showing her more love than her own fans, claiming that fans never talk about her enough and whining about how she deserved better. Mistreatment was a problem in K-pop generally at that time, and fans had dedicated themselves to helping underrated and underappreciated idols in K-pop, even if they weren't from their favorite groups. Despite K-pop fan wars being one of the biggest problems we have right now, there are so many good aspects to being a K-pop fan, and helping each other when necessary was one of them. But Jisoo stans took advantage of what was supposed to be a good thing and gathered sympathy for Jisoo's non-existent mistreatment. This part was a game changer because K-pop stans no longer had to mask themselves as Jisoo stans trying to mess up the fandom. No. They could now openly say that they did not care about Blackpink and was simply here to appreciate Jisoo's talent. You know things only get worse from here. The number of people who have admitted online to be Jisoo fans but not giving a damn about Blackpink is not shocking after taking a deeper analysis of how the solo fandoms of Blackpink played out. I'll say not everyone in this section of her fandom is a hater of the other members, but their standing was basically drawn under false pretenses. Outsiders genuinely thought they were doing Jisoo a favor. Instead, thanks to genuine haters of Blackpink, all they did was drive a deeper wedge within an already fractured fandom. With support outside of the OT4 fandom, Jisoo's solo fan base grew enormously, and they made noise that was impossible to ignore on social media at any opportunity that arose. Jisoo stans became the ultimate whiners in K-pop, carrying on the nonsense that haters manipulated them to believe, and every compliment they gave Jisoo seemed to be backhanded. Not once could anyone compliment Jisoo on her own merit. It was always, she improved, unlike Jennie, or she's vocally stable, unlike Rosé, or she's reserved and respectful, unlike Lisa. Every compliment was an opportunity to attack the rest of the group, and we know if something happens in K-pop long enough, it becomes acceptable, because they didn't stop there. Jisoo was also painted as the only genuine member of the group personality-wise. People took her calm approach to everything as maturity, and every other member who in their minds was an obstacle to their success as problematic. Jennie was a bitch thanks to her many scandals, Lisa was trying too hard to be a cute maknae, making her personality fake, and Rosé was pretty much irrelevant to them, leaving Jisoo, the poor, mistreated, and underrated member, as the only genuine person in that group. By the end of 2019, it was common knowledge that a lot of people outside of the Blackpink fandom were fans of Jisoo. That coupled with the normalizing of hating Jennie and Lisa, the mask could come right off. Because Jennie and Lisa fans were overt in attacking one another, most of the toxicity of the fandom as a whole is accredited to their solo fandoms, but no one ever bothered to look at Jisoo's fandom because all they ever did was victimize Jisoo. Jisoo stans helped start, fuel, and blow up an entire hate train, and they got away with it. 2020 changed people's perspective on Jisoo stans because of the constant defending of Jennie. Because Jennie sympathizers were on the rise, every solo fandom's reasons for hating her was being broken down little by little and questioned. People were coming to the realization that it was all rooted in jealousy. Jisoo fans who were first seen and to a large degree praised as a calm fandom who didn't bother anyone but focused on their fave were now being revealed as secretly obsessed with victimizing Jisoo and comparing her to everyone else. Online users on YouTube and other platforms began to call them out on the obsession with rewriting history and trying to downplay Jisoo's success for their own need to complain, which forced them to cut the underrated and underappreciated labels on the woman. Some tried, and to this very day still try to push that agenda, but fans kept squashing it. The fandom was branded as annoying pygmies whose only job was to complain about a well-respected, loved, and incredibly popular idol. People were starting to see how successful Jisoo was, and calling her underappreciated wasn't making any sense anymore. Stan culture was changing at that time, and in the wake of being more serious about mental health in K-pop, toxic fandoms were not being given room to behave badly and get away with it. That year was also the time when K-pop had all their focus on either Shin Jimin or Woojin, making all outsiders involved in Blackpink's business rather occupied with bullying other people instead. This helped clear the fog, exposing the true intentions of this fandom. Despite being called out for their overdramatic theatrics, few next to none ever really addressed Jisoo's fandom's part in fueling the train wreck that was 2018 and 2019, and that is because no one views them as responsible. This is what truly makes them the greatest villains of all time in K-pop. Their entire campaign was molded off of victimizing Jisoo, but unlike Lisa stans, they didn't respond by directly attacking Jennie. Instead, they helped fuel her hate train by victimizing Jisoo, making and editing the MR-removed videos, and misconstruing facts about her popularity and line distribution. They used other people's anger to get things done, and only took an active role in the bashing when the behavior was deemed normal. When asked which solo stans amongst the fandom is the most toxic, I always say Jisoo stans, but people never understand why. What makes someone a villain to me is not how loud they are with their hatred, but simply how much they can get away with. Jisoo stans managed to get outsiders who hated Blackpink to love Jisoo, create a stable fan base for her, and at the same time hate on the other members. A large portion of her fandom today do not care for the group as a whole, but adore the woman, and even now, knowing that she's not as underrated as her OG fans try to push, they do not care. They stand her regardless and will continue to do so throughout her career. Their huge support made her a force to be reckoned with in the fashion industry internationally, which helped her remain relevant despite being in a group with powerhouse forces such as Lisa and Jennie. Her original fandom capitalized on what was a crisis, had the whole Stan universe eating out of the palm of their hand, and they never got blamed for it. You know what I call that? Evil genius.